In the last video, we changed up some of our calculator code to create some functions so that the structure and cadence of our program is easier to understand and more explicit. However, we found that this broke our calculator code, and to understand why it broke, we need to understand the scoping of variables. In this video, we're going to take a look at number 1, what is scoping? Number 2, how does Python handle scoping? Let's go in and take a look. Scoping is the Python term for how variables persist around the code. So this is a great example. In the first line of this Python script, we define a variable and assign a value 1 to this variable. We then define a function, foo, that redefines the variable into a string, and then we print in foo variable equals variable. And then after foo, we print globally variable equals the value in variable. And then we call foo. And then we create a for loop that loops 5 times, increases variable by 1 every time, and prints variable. So what would happen? So what happens is, whenever you create a new function, the scoping is localized within that function, which means that any variable here in this line 4 only exists as long as the function is executing its statement block. In other words, this variable's value is scoped within the statement block that I've highlighted here, lines 4 and 5. So if we define variable as a string here, and we say in foo variable equals variable, then we'll actually get in foo variable equals a string, like this. When we print globally variable equals variable, we'll actually get globally variable equals 1, because here when Python looks at variable in this context, it knows that the scope is of the global scope. So we'll look at variable as it's defined here and not as it's defined in foo. So foo actually doesn't know about this variable, and neither does the global scoping know about the variable in foo. And we then call foo, we'll get this printed out, right? However, in a for loop doesn't create a new scope. So there's no additional scoping when we create a for loop or a while loop or an if then else statement. Here, when we loop over this loop 5 times and we add 1 to the variable 5 times, when we print the variable here, we actually get the number 6. Because this variable is scoped at the global scope, and we're adding 1 to this definition here and not adding a 1 to a string. And that's scoping. If we go back to our calculator, we know that when we print instructions and ask for inputs, here when we execute ask inputs, we've created a new local scope where num1 and num2 exists within ask input but doesn't exist in the global scope. Therefore, when we use calculate, it has no idea what num1 and num2 is, and so it cannot do any sort of calculation, and because we're referencing a variable that doesn't exist, Python throws an error. So let's see how we can fix this in the next video. And that's all there is to it. So we've just learned and get introduced into the concept of scoping through an example piece of code. Scoping defines where variables exist and how long do their values exist. When we create a function, we create a new local scope that is separate from the global scope, and variables that happen within the functions doesn't know about the world outside of the function. In the next video, I'm going to revisit the calculator and show you how we can fix the problems that arise because of function scoping in Python. I'll see you guys next time.